When I first discovered this book that we're reading, it was on a resource table at a conference that I was at. It was the only book on the table, and it was propped up with its own little stand. And I'm pretty sure this chapter 8 is the part I read and why I wanted to engage this book. It's really good about the power of words. I would encourage you to pick it up. Even if you just read chapter 8, it's pretty good. And so there are two things I'd like you to consider about the power of words. The first is their elemental nature, like in a gaseous state, like aerosol, fluid, and solid. We'll get to that in a second. The second thing I'd like you to consider is we call it floating signifiers, or when words no longer mean what they used to, and they are untethered, unmoored, decoupled from their original meaning. So here's two things I'd like you to consider this morning. First is I discovered this concept about elemental nature of things when I was studying racism and the concept of whiteness specifically. But I have found it useful in a couple other areas of life, including this power of words conversation. Words are fluid, and that bothers some people, is that they can change and migrate and evolve, pick up new baggage, or lose their meaning over time. But they are fluid. And the author points out that words translate ideas and concepts into actions. And it reminded me very much of this elemental nature, because you can have something that's pretty elusive or abstract, like an idea, and then words are often how it translates down. And so that's their fluid nature, right? They're this liquid. And then it becomes very solid, like concrete in actions and consequences. Understanding the fluid nature of language, for me, is really helpful to be able to map and chart how things change over time. Which brings me to the second thing. I like to read people post-World War II who reflect on, like, how could that have happened? What was going on in society where something that atrocious, right, could have come about? And so whether this is in philosophy, like critical theory, or sociology, or linguistics, I find it really insightful when we have something as horrendous and consequential as both the Holocaust and the atomic bombs. How did that come about? And as a person, a theologian, what were the religious underpinnings or lack thereof? So I am fascinated by tracking when words or concepts move or migrate and no longer mean what they used to. Here are some of my favorite examples. At the beginning of the 20th century, the phrase "pull yourself up by your bootstraps," so like in the late 1880s, pull yourself up by your bootstraps was synonymous with impossible. It was just a colloquial term that meant impossible. And less than 100 years later, it came to mean stop whining and get to work. Try harder. Be self-sufficient. It became an assignment. So that's an amazing migration, right? So that might qualify as a floating signifier. You often see it in crisis situations. So I was very intrigued with the events of September 11th, 2001, and to watch the rhetorical acrobatics of the Bush-Cheney coalition with Rumsfeld. You saw it in the popular way that we talked about those horrible events. So, for instance, the World Trade Center became the Twin Towers. People forgot that essentially it was about world trade, and it, ground zero, 9/11, and world trade was dropped from the equation altogether. So like that kind of stuff is worth noting because of how it functions in our common mythology to justify war. Like even the Patriot Act, right, was a surveillance permission, the creation of a surveillance society. So you really have to watch that stuff, account for it, and attend to it. It's worth mapping it out and keeping track of it because you will watch it change over time. I was part of an organization once where it really stood out to me because they used language so fluently, meaning when a concept or a term was in common usage and everyone used it the same way, and it really sort of picked up momentum. So for instance, I noticed that diversity always meant racial diversity. And there's lots of different types of diversity, but in this organization, in many academic settings, diversity is code for racial diversity, but it gets cut in half. So anytime something is dropped or not spoken, it needs to be accounted for. Like if you call someone a female comedian, but you don't call someone a male comedian, right? So there's it's that unspoken thing that needs to be addressed. So in this organization, diversity really meant racial diversity. But where it caught my attention was when innovation also became a code for diversity, which was racial diversity. So innovation was racial diversity. And so both on far left and far right circles, language has this fluid nature, and it is elemental. It takes ideas that are abstract, sort of like gas, right, vapor, and in the fluid nature of language, it translates it into something much more solid or concrete with consequences. So it's worth paying attention to words. And in this section of the book, I thought it would just be worth reading just this one little paragraph. When someone tells you who they are, believe them. You too take care of the way that you talk about others. Be wary of slogans. Ask questions. Define terms. Rephrase instead of repeat. Respond instead of react. So that's my encouragement today for Chapter 8, Day 8. And I do apologize that I went a total 6-7. I flipped Chapter 6 and Day 6. I don't know what happened. The only thing I can hide behind is that we are having a plumbing issue at my house, and we've had plumbers and the mold abatement people there, and I just mixed up those 2 days. So forgive me for that. I'll see you tomorrow.